Megan Ramos is a clinical researcher from Canada. She now lives in the United States in California, and she joined Dr. Fung and his colleagues as a research student with a keen interest in preventative medicine when she was just 15 years old. She's a world-leading expert on therapeutic fasting and low-carbohydrate diets and has guided over 10,000 people worldwide. She has amazing books that you could find on Amazon. I saw Megan has a new book coming out as well, Fasting for Women. I saw that today. That's super cool. And without further ado, here is the wonderful, the beautiful, the incredible Megan Ramos. Hi.
Hey, Ben. Thanks for the introduction.
You're very welcome. Thanks for being here today. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
I am even better now that you joined us. Thank you so much. I know it's earlier for you out in California and it's a weekend, so thank you for being so committed.
Oh, no, we've been trapped under monsoon rain for like 30 days now.
That's what I hear, which is rare for California, huh?
Yeah, locals are not too sure what to do about it. I'm from Toronto, so I'm used to weird weather at this time of the year. But yeah, I don't know how many days are going on now, so I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, well, you're here with us today. We're gonna have a great time. I wanna focus the conversation on two metabolic conditions that are just everywhere, and not just in America, but all over the world, which is insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, and why it's not a lifelong sentence. And you've done such incredible work and research on helping people understand how this develops and how it does not just develop in a day, a month, or a year. It takes many, many years, and how we could stop putting fires to the flame or putting more extra wood to the fire and actually start reversing this now. Or if you are full on insulin resistant or type 2 diabetic, there is promise, there is hope that you could actually reverse this and get this in the right direction. So I would like to ask you, the first question is, how does insulin resistance actually develop? What are the root causes of this developing? And then how does that lead to type 2 diabetes?
Yeah, sure. So there's several different ways that we can develop type 2 diabetes. Probably the biggest culprits that we face in modern society are surrounding our eating habits and stress levels. So when it comes to eating habits, there's actually sort of two really frustrating causes of insulin resistance. One of them, and what I'm sure so many people here today are familiar with, is just eating the refined and processed sugars and fats. And when you go to a restaurant for a quote unquote real food meal, they give you like half a plate of starch and like this little tiny bit of non-starch with some animal protein. And so we're just eating like this really high, glucose sugar load or inflammatory load from those processed and refined seed oils and vegetable oils that we don't want to have. So eating these foods produces a lot of insulin in the body. So much so over time that the levels become toxic and they lead to the development of hyperinsulinemia and insulin resistance. So that's what I think a lot of people in the keto space do. And what we find is it's a great approach. This is a dietary strategy I use to help get my health back on track. But what we often see is, people, they'll lose 50 of that 80 pounds, but they can't lose the last 30. Or their hemoglobin A1C, that diabetic blood marker that doctors in the Western world fixate on in their blood test results, they'll get it down from 9, to like 5.8. But why can't they get it to 4.8? You really want to sort of be less than 5.2 to be out of that, risky zone there. So a lot of people come and they'll say, hey, now with the popularity of the lower carb and ketogenic diet, so it's great. But people will just say, hey, am I just so broken? Like I can't make it the last 3 miles, and is this as good as it gets for me? And that's where the second cause of insulin resistance from our nutritional perspective comes from, is the meal frequency. And people just eating often all day long. Every time we eat, we are going to cause our insulin levels to go up a bit. So if you're snacking and you're grazing for hours every day, you're constantly filling up your system with drops of insulin, some bigger drops, some smaller drops, depending on what it is that you're eating. At the end of the day, that adds up to a lot. It's like when you think that you don't sit there and spend an hour on your phone at once, but you check it periodically throughout the day, and then you get that alarming message at the end of the week that you've spent 5 hours a day on your phone.
Great analogy. Yeah.
It builds up, it adds up. And that's what we see being, a really big culprit and driver of insulin resistance. And, when I first started fasting when I was sick, my grandmother with dementia was like the only advocate I had in my family. Everyone else thought I was losing my mind. And, she said, we did perhaps maybe eat the best food growing up, but she said, we ate 3 times a day and that was it. No snacks. Like your father wasn't allowed to have a snack before dinner. He'd ruin his appetite, and he wasn't allowed to have a snack before bed. And that meant he didn't eat enough at dinner. And we sure as heck didn't send him to school with pails of treats and a nonstop supply of food. And so, things have definitely changed. And we've definitely seen the correlation, between those lifestyle changes when it came to eating habits and meal timing with type 2 diabetes. So this meal frequency is just so critical to be mindful of and to stop always filling the body up with insulin.
So how long does it take on average before a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes is made in the conventional space? How long has that been progressing before on average you're like, well, your A1C is 6.4 or higher and you're type 2 diabetic? How long does that take?
Yeah, so it's actually pretty wild. And like even Western medicine that knows this doesn't even know it. So it takes about 10 to 15 years. Like it manifests and it builds up and it causes damage in that time. So, Ben, you mentioned that when I was a kid, I started in nephrology. And we would start, as time went on, we would start seeing more and more people in their 40s and their 50s having this unexplained kidney disease. They had no high blood pressure. They had no genetic markers, no autoimmune things were firing off. We can figure it out. So because they were relatively healthy on the surface, we would send them for the invasive renal biopsy, kidney biopsy. Every single time, like clockwork, it came back with diabetic kidney disease, diabetic nephropathy. And when we went back and looked at the blood work as researchers and medical doctors, we say, but the A1C is 5.5, the A1C is 5.6. Like, we're approaching on that pre-diabetic range, but we're not even in the borderline zone yet. And that's how much damage is still happening. So, they might not get their diabetes diagnosis for another 5 years till that number creeps up, but the damage is happening.
Oh, yeah. The perfect example of how broken the system is. It's like you got to wait for a diagnosis before they tell you to make some changes.
Yeah.
So it's kind of twofold. You said it's high carbohydrate diets that are highly processed in combination with seed oils, and then the frequency. So therefore, if we just think logically, right? 3 macronutrients. We have carbohydrates, we have protein, we have fat. When we look at the glucose and insulin response, I'd like for you to break down what are the glucose and insulin responses from those 3 macronutrients.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we eat carbohydrates, they're chains of various lengths of simple sugars. Glucose is one that most of you are probably hear of. You check your blood glucose level, you lose your glucometer to check that. So these carbohydrates are various lengths and they're digested at various rates or whatnot. But when it comes to the glucose, the simple sugar itself, in order for it to get into our cells to provide our body with fuel, it's 100% dependent on glucose. Or sorry, it's 100% dependent on insulin to navigate that relationship to a certain extent. So there are other factors, but I always talk about glucose is like a toddler. And insulin is like the parent or the guardian of that toddler. And it is sort of responsible for orchestrating the events. The glucose just can't necessarily completely do it all on its own. And yes, there are other factors, but there's a large dependency there. So the more carbs you eat, the more sugar you eat, the more insulin you're going to produce in response because of that dependency. And if the cells don't need it for energy, then the glucose or the insulin helps, store that glucose for use later on as glycogen or as body fat. When you eat protein, you don't really get this type of response. Protein is primarily a building block in the body. If we do consume maybe extreme excess of it, it will get converted to glucose, and we might see elevations in glucose there because the body only does need so many building blocks. But protein has a ton of functions in the body. So there's sort of a minimal insulin response when it comes to eating protein. And then dietary fat. Dietary fat's got so many roles in the body. And I actually loathe that it's called dietary fat because when people hear that, they think of like body fat. They think of their gut, and so they'll then visualize that butter in their gut. I'm like, no, it's that low fat, loaf of bread. That is what's causing your gut, not the butter that's causing your gut. So I wish dietary fat had a different name or body fat had a different name, just so we could further distinguish the two. But the insulin response there is virtually negligible. So if you're looking to prevent this disease from happening or getting worse, then you don't want to add fuel to the fire. So if you're constantly pounding back the carbohydrates, you're going to be constantly producing the insulin in large volumes, and that's going to be problematic. So eating a diet that's higher and prioritizes natural health occurring healthy fats, and then has a good amount of protein in it that you can lean in. Protein's so awesome because it really helps crush sugar cravings. Yeah. It's got so many beneficial roles, and especially as we age, we need more of it. And then minimizing the carbohydrate intake. And, why would you add fuel to the fire? So eating a ketogenic diet or a variation of a low carbohydrate diet really helps minimize adding fuel to the fire if you have the disease, or it can help prevent it in the long term.
Hey, Keto Camper, I want to interrupt the video real quick to share with you what I believe is one of the most important nutrients that we should be taking every single day. Most people are deficient in this nutrient, and it's responsible for over 400 enzymatic activities in your body. And your body just doesn't make it. So it's required to be taken in a high quality supplement or from high quality foods. The problem with the food is that our soil is depleted and it's hard to get this quality nutrient. So what is this nutrient? It's called magnesium. But I'm going to share something with you very fascinating. Check this out. Upgraded Formulas has this incredible product called Upgraded Magnesium. And Barton Scott, the developer of this product and company, he's a brilliant guy. He created nanoparticle magnesium, which has the ability to penetrate your membranes and go right into your cells. There's a 99.99% absorption rate. Now, this is unheard of because with other magnesium products, you better believe it's not that high. And there's an interesting study they're doing with Upgraded Mag I want to share with you real quick. Early results from a sleep study with Dr. Sachin Patel showed that the average doctor in the group using this product has achieved an improvement of over 35% in deep sleep, more sleep studies than a double-blind controlled placebo study with Upgraded Magnesium is coming sooner. And you better believe those results are going to be super exciting. We already know this. Upgraded Magnesium is easily the best supplement you can take for better sleep, including deep sleep, muscle aches, cramping, and any other signs of a magnesium deficiency, which is so common, unfortunately. What makes Upgraded Formulas unique, as I mentioned, is that it's a nanoparticle. This means it is absorbed very rapidly and efficiently by your blood cells. They produce a plasma-like version of minerals that the body recognizes and absorbs without digestion. And the results are phenomenal. I really believe just taking this for a couple of nights, you'll notice a big difference. So if you want to get Upgraded Formulas, Upgraded Mag, and any of their products, they also do some incredible hair mineral analysis test to see your mineral imbalances and deficiencies, etc., and other incredible products that we've referenced before. Head over to upgradedformulas.com and use the coupon code KETOSIS to get 15% off your entire order. That is upgradedformulas.com. Coupon code is KETOSIS to get 15% off your entire order. I'm going to drop a link for you down below in the notes of this video. Okay, let's go back to this video. Great breakdown of the 3 macronutrients. Just understanding that alone, it makes sense why low carb ketogenic approach can actually lower glucose and insulin levels. I love the comparison of glucose being the child, you said, and insulin being the parent. Is that what you said? Yeah, great analogy. And when we look at the standard American diet and compare that to what the human body is designed to use as fuel, I know that there's about optimal levels of sugar in the bloodstream. The entire bloodstream is about 1 teaspoon, right?
Mm.
Which is about 80 milligrams per deciliters if you're checking your blood sugar. That would be an optimal rate. The liver could store about 100 to 120 grams of glucose, and then the muscle, depending on how much muscle you have, about 400 grams.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just kind of an average, but it changes depending on how much muscle you have, how big you are, et cetera. But let's say that is the average, and then we look at what the average American is eating, right? We think about an acai bowl. A lot of people say, "Oh,
Yeah.
I'm healthy. I have my acai bowl for breakfast." I have the stats right here: 117 grams of sugar in an acai bowl. 16 ounces of orange juice. It's a fruit, right? 52 grams of sugar, and then a can of soda is 9 teaspoons of sugar as well. So you can think about what's happening here when we're flooding the body of glucose. Insulin's job, one of the jobs of insulin, is to take that parent of insulin, to take the kid of glucose to the cells for energy. But then what happens when those cells get full? What happens next, Megan?
Well, then your body has to store it for fat. My colleague Jason loves to use the analogy of a wallet versus a bank.
Yeah.
Your wallet can only store so much cash. It has a limited capacity, whereas the bank, theoretically has an unlimited capacity. I don't have copious quantities of cash, but I assume Bill Gates has his money in a bank. So.
Well, it's a great analogy. I always give that analogy too, that Dr. Fung has given. So it's like, yeah, the benefit of using your wallet, your glycogen store, is easy access, right? It's like easy to put cash in, take cash out, burn glucose, use glucose. The drawback is, like you said, limited storage capacity. And then a bank safe, it's like the drawback of using a bank safe is that it'll take longer to get to. You got to drive to the bank, wait in line. But then the benefit is like you have almost unlimited storage capacity in the form of your body fat.
That's like, yeah, exactly that. And then like going to the bank to take out cash, it's a huge pain. So trying to access that, stored energy in your fat is a huge pain. And then the fat cells accumulate other stuff, which isn't cool or good for your health, and, can cause stress on the body as you start to burn fat. So it's hugely annoying. Keep a good amount of cash in your wallet for easy access, minimize the number of times you have to go to the bank to withdraw. So, when we're constantly eating these carbs, our wallet is at capacity all of the time. So we are just constantly going and dumping money into the bank. I like using the analogy too of a gas tank. And I know I live in America now, but I still do everything in liters. I've yet to convert to to the system. But imagine there's like a government mandate that you must buy an entire tank of fuel every day or they're going to throw you in jail. We don't live in that type of society. Maybe we do in some parts, but you work from home like I do. So like I go to acupuncture and I go to the gym, like I'm not driving for miles a day, right? So to avoid going to jail, if I'm not emptying my tank, I'm going to have to fill up gas canisters. Eventually they fill up my car, my garage, my house, my backyard, and everything becomes this toxic load because I'm constantly having to fuel when I don't need fuel. And that's what we're doing, especially with our, like what we're eating and how often we're eating. Like we wake up, we eat, we go to work, we have a donut, we have a coffee break in the morning, lunch, like it's nonstop, it's chaotic, right? You're buying like 3 full tanks of fuel a day and you're barely driving your body at all. So of course you're going to store it. And then you've got so much fuel tanks, so many fat cells at the brim, like you are just a toxic, hazardous zone.
Yeah, we don't want that. So you mentioned the A1C might not even change for many, many years. Meanwhile, there could be kidney damage. There could be insulin resistance being developed. That's not to say you shouldn't test your A1C, by the way. We had Dr. Boz here on last Wednesday. She loves you, by the way. She adores you. And she was explaining the benefits of the A1C. But she also showed you all she recommended looking at fasting glucose and postprandial glucose. Maybe you could explain a little bit about what you use in the fasting methods with your students on how to gauge that with the A1C, but also those postprandial glucose responses.
Yeah. And I definitely want, like, A1C is great. It's all about it's a piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And really, we don't want to neglect any pieces. There's not one all solution or one all answer or guidance. So we got to look at the puzzle. So it's definitely a great piece of the puzzle. Just sort of at the most basic level, we like checking someone's glucose when they first wake up, or within the first 90 minutes of them waking up, just to sort of see what that glucose response is. We get, a surge of cortisol first thing in the morning. That also affects the glucose. And we just want to see, okay, how high does it get? How bad does it get? In the morning time, people with excess, with diabetic related issues, they'll start to see elevations in their morning blood sugar level that start to creep outside of the normal range. And that is a big red flag. So we like to check that. We like to check sort of a baseline. So before they have anything to eat, they sit down and have a meal, and then track it, an hour later and 2 hours later, just to sort of see what their glucose response is. I mean, it's kind of a shoddy version of an oral glucose tolerance test at home, but it gives you some really great data. I love CGMs. It's sick of CGM on everyone. I wish they'd get better, because even like the fancy I have a Dexcom G6, and even then it's kind of okay, but at least it helps you identify trends, which are really, really important. I was at an insulin, they do craft tests. Is a test. It's like an oral glucose tolerance test that you go to get that quote unquote diabetes diagnosis, but they actually check insulin instead of glucose. And that's pretty cool. We were able to do that in Toronto for a while, just because of public health and how we were able to operate in Toronto, Canada. It's a little bit more finicky in the United States and in other places in Canada, but that's a cool gold standard, kind of strategy, or one of them. So really just looking at that glucose response to food, I think, is important.
So important. What are your thoughts on getting a fasting insulin done?
I love a fasting insulin. The only thing is it's a little volatile. So we had this problem in Toronto. We had a lot of flexibility in our province, and we had public health care. So an insulin test was like $1.13 to the government. It was super cheap.
Wow.
And Ontario was just a really big province, so there weren't that many regulations. Whereas if you were in British Columbia or Quebec, and you were not an endocrinologist, you'd have to get permission to order an insulin test on your patients. And then in the US, there's costs and whatnot, and finding a doctor too sometimes that will order it can be prohibitive. But there's a lot more private options though here. Which is great, because you can pretty much, if you do a little research, you can get your insulin checked. So we were checking them all of the time in Toronto, because we had this flexibility, and we would just see that they could be volatile, depending. One day I got rear-ended on the way to work. My car wasn't that damaged, but then my tire blew. I was like 2 hours late. The clinic was so annoyed they had to reschedule my patients. It was a disaster. So I said, just for kicks, I want to test my fasting insulin, because my patients have been canceled, might as well. And my insulin was quite elevated compared to where it usually sits at that moment. And then the next day I checked it after a good night of sleep and processing the hectic day before, and it was back down to usual. So we would see these bizarre fluctuations, but we were just checking it too often. So most people are checking it not as often. We love if a person can get it done every 3 months when they're trying to go through the recovery. And doing it at that frequency, you should usually see it trend downwards. The problem is the reference range in this country and in my home country is just such garbage. It's just, you want to be at that very low end. You definitely, in the United States, you want to be below 5, and even like 3, and 2 is okay. That idea, sometimes people ask, hey, is it too low? Like my last one was like 2.12, and the thing is, if I were to eat carbohydrates, it would go up. So I have that ability, unlike a type 1 diabetic, who, if they were to sit down and eat an entire potato with nothing else, their insulin would not be able to go up.
Yep.
So that's really sort of the biggest difference. So if you know that that's not a problem for you and you're eating a low carb ketogenic diet and you're fasting and your insulin is sort of in this, lower end of the range that functional medicine dictates is optimal, then, the reason why I'm sharing this is because every day someone asks me, my doctor now thinks I have type 1 diabetes.
Is the low
So
insulin?
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like 2, like
Yeah.
it's really kind of
Well,
crazy.
I have okay. First clarifying thing here is you mentioned when you got into a car accident, you were late to work. There was stress, so it was mental emotional stress. What's the mechanism there that drove insulin up? I know cortisol went up for you. Glucose followed cortisol. Did insulin bump up
Yeah.
because of that?
So stress hormone cortisol, it's produced by adrenal glands to help us deal with the stress. I mean, the body's trying to do us a favor by producing it, but to your point, it has this hormonal cascade of things that we do not really want to happen, or we want to minimize the frequency at these stressful events, right? Or the severity of it. So the cortisol then causes the body to produce insulin. We get a glucose response too as part of that stress response, which, promotes insulin. So everything that's happening, the whole hormonal domino effect shoots off production of insulin within the body. And that's why stress is a huge culprit. And stress, even with a fairly decent diet, can sometimes alone chronic stress. We know chronic stress will kill us.
Yeah.
I was, chatting with Jason Fung not that long ago about someone who was under chronic stress. And he said, you need to tell them to stop because it's just going to kill them, and cancer and diabetes is not good. You need to give them this advice. It's a personal friend we were discussing. So, it's just really important to try to avoid or minimize that cortisol response.
So what's the difference between that mental emotional cortisol response and actually exercise? Because we see the same thing in a way. When you exercise, you have a CGM on, or you check your glucose goes up and then back down. What's the difference in those two responses?
Yeah, people say the same thing with fasting too, because like the what really sort of different, like people say, isn't fasting just like extreme calorie restriction? No, it's not. In calorie restriction, your metabolism just slows down to meet your caloric intake, and it cuts off cognitive function, cardiovascular, respiratory, reproductive function. That's why people on low carbohydrate diets feel like garbage. But when you're fasting, you actually have this nervous system response, and this for me is kind of like the golden nugget thing that I like to throw at people when I say, hey, isn't it just the same but more intense? No, you're actually activating the sympathetic nervous system, that flight or fight nervous system. And then people panic because they associate that with stress. Well, there's this whole concept of hormesis.
So sorry to cut you off. So on Thursday we had Dr. Pompa and Mindy, and we went into the principle of hormesis. So go even deeper. I love that you just brought that up. Yeah.
So it's about finding like the right amount of stress. So it's important that we understand that too much or too little of anything is bad for us. So like in type 1 diabetes, not having that ability to output insulin, we know that's bad. In type 2 diabetes, having an abundance of insulin, we know that that's bad. And it's kind of our human nature, I think, to always lean into an extreme of things rather than find that middle ground. So it's the same thing. Like with stress on the body, too little stress, well, we're never going to become resilient beings. We're just going to decay, and it's not good for us. And too much stress is also detrimental and can lead to all of these funky, unhealthy conditions. So we just want to find like the right amount of stress for us that challenges our body. I always like to equate it to working out at the gym. Like if you're like 2023, I'm going to go to the gym for the first time in 30 years. You're not going to walk in there and do the same weight training program as someone who's worked out 4 times a week for the last 30 years. So if bicep curls are your goal, like you're not going to be picking up those 50-pound dumbbells right away. Like maybe 10 is challenging. And for people who do work out, if you pick up 1-pound dumbbells, you're not stressing your muscles at all. It's kind of a little bit moot. At least you're moving. That's good for your body. But if your goal is to grow muscle, you're not going to, because you're not inflicting those micro tears, those minor stressors on the body to get those muscles to grow. So when we go to the gym, everybody knows you've got to pick a weight that is challenging, but not too challenging, so you can reach your sort of desired goals. And then once that becomes easy, then you increase it and you find that sweet spot with where it's challenging, but where you're not going to tear something, rip something, or hurt yourself, because that's too much stress. That's too intense. So we talk about this with fasting too. There's a ton of people who, want to do a 5-day fast every single week, week in and week out. 2016 was the year of that in my program. And it's like, that's kind of like, walking into the gym and always, going, like, preparing, like, the next day you're doing the biggest competition of your life. You can't live at high speed all of the time. So it's about finding a balance sort of in between. So, I mean, that's, to us and how we try to teach hormesis to our clients.
That's perfect explanation. It makes sense with the exercise. Everybody gets that. Stress is only bad when you don't adapt to it, right? And you want to find the right amount of stress that you could adapt to, which includes fasting. Fasting is a stress. And if your body adapts to that stress, it's so wonderful what could take place. It harnesses the innate intelligence. But if you are too aggressive with your fasting, like doing a 5-day water fast every week, too much for your body to adapt. Now that hormetic curve drops. So instead of benefiting, you actually lose the benefits and actually could hurt yourself. Like if you do a CrossFit workout after doing no exercise for many, many years. So great explanation there. We'll get a little bit more into fasting in a second, but just to close the landing plane on the conversation on insulin, and you mentioned some doctors will see like a fasting insulin of like 2.1 or 2.0, and they'll think, oh, you might be type 1 diabetic. At that point, would you suggest, or what are your thoughts on also getting a C-peptide done? And maybe you could explain what a C-peptide is and if there's any value in looking at that as well.
Yeah, so C-peptides are manufactured by beta cells. And beta cells are the insulin-producing cells in our pancreas. They're largely responsible for insulin production. So the idea is if we measure C-peptides in your blood serum, that it will give us an indicator of how many functioning beta cells that you have. But there's caveats with this too. That I find with insulin levels. People who follow a ketogenic diet, who are fasting regularly, they have low insulin demands. So, their beta cells are not flushing out tons of C-peptides for us to measure. So they also tend to fall at the lower end of the normal reference range, which then causes some doctors to panic as well. And we would always check fasting insulin and C-peptides every single time. I like doing it at baseline so we could get more of an indicator of the pancreas and its flexibility. How over-functioning is it? Is it bogged down with so much fat it can't function? Or hey, are we looking at latent onset type 1 diabetes here because they've just burned the heck out of their pancreas from, causing it to produce so much insulin over the years, which we do see sometimes. So it's good at baseline. It's good to follow along with fasting insulin too, but we do see that trend. So, the idea is if you do decide to go and, eat that whole potato on its own, you will see those C-peptides go up, just like you'll see the insulin levels go up as well. But I think it's a great test to check at baseline. It's a great test to check periodically. Every now and then we get someone who's in our community and not in our coaching program, and they're really just kind of struggling with those blood sugar levels. And we'll say, okay, have a meal, have some, starch at that meal, and then go get your C-peptides and fasting insulin checked. And let's just see, how much it's producing, hour after you eat those foods, or 1 to 2 hours after you eat those foods. And sometimes it doesn't go up at all, but the sugar stays alarmingly high for hours. And that's an indicator that, okay, maybe there's more latent onset stuff, or maybe some more autoimmune stuff that's manifesting later on in life that we need to take a look at. But then if the person eats that starch and all of their numbers go up, then, hey, the pancreas is in working order. So we don't need our diet and lifestyle is not hindering us. And that's what we found through our clinical chronic checking of these values.
Yeah, and you've checked a lot. I mean, tens and tens of thousands of patients over the years. The last thing on insulin before we transition to fasting is insulin has an important role, right? It's not bad unless it's called all the time. So Is there a problem with chronically low levels of insulin? Meaning somebody who's never having carbs, they years of ketosis, years of low carb, and they have chronically low levels of insulin. Can that be problematic?
Um, so, I mean, it's an interesting question. Insulin does have variety of roles within the body. I do like to consciously spike my insulin levels intermittently. Just I think intermittency is really sort of a key for great things in life. So I will consciously spike it. I'm doing fertility stuff right now, so I'm not really doing ketogenic diet right now. So I'm eating some starch and a little bit of fruit, small portions with each meal, because it can, there's relationships there with sex hormones and stuff that's important. So it really sort of, I found for men that we've worked with that longer term keto doesn't necessarily seem to be as problematic, but most people inadvertently spike their insulin levels because of the state of society and our relationship with foods. Our brain knows that the food gives us a dopamine response. So most men do. Women, I do think there are benefits for women for spiking it periodically. For women who are perimenopausal, postmenopausal, in that stage of their life, I do try to encourage carb cycling a couple times a week for hormonal benefits. Awesome. For women who are like me, and are sort of going through the baby making ordeal, it's okay to be lower carb the first couple of weeks of the cycle, but that, having that insulin, having that carbs can be beneficial for progesterone in the second half of the cycle. And progesterone is really what's key for keeping, your endometrial lining. But estrogen and progesterone are both very important, but progesterone is really the nourishment that helps, make that embryo stick. So with younger women who are maybe combating PCOS while they're trying to do fertility at the same time, then we sort of have these 2-week cycles where we try to spike it lesser in the first half and a little bit, not necessarily spike, keep it a little bit more constant and elevated in the second half.
Hey, I want to just briefly interrupt the video you're watching to share something with you. One of my favorite companies that I use for health and longevity and biohacking is a company called Bon Charge. And they have a whole range of incredible products, including the blue light blocking glasses you see me wear right now. But one of my favorite products from them is an infrared sauna blanket. That's right. You don't have to spend a ton of money investing in a sauna or spending so much time driving to a facility with the sauna. They actually created a sauna blanket that you could use in the comfort of your own home. And I use this all the time. Why would we want to even do a sauna? Well, there's a lot of research and a lot of studies showing the benefits of infrared sauna. The sauna blanket works by raising your heart rate to a workout or a training session. So you burn more calories while you're actually lying down and relaxing. You could burn up to 600 calories in one single session. Also, it's going to cause you to sweat. And one method of flushing out toxins from your body is through sweat. There's also one of my favorite benefits, this endorphin release, endorphin rush you get from using a sauna blanket. And every time I get out of the sauna blanket, I feel like I just got a 60-minute massage. And that's because of the endorphin benefit from it. So how this works differently than a regular sauna is that it works by using infrared light, which heats the body directly rather than the air around you like a traditional sauna. This means you get the same benefit at a lower heat. So it's easy to set up. It's super convenient. 30 to 40 minutes will suffice in terms of the length of the sessions. And you do that 2 to 3 times a week, you're going to feel amazing. Add that to your keto fasting protocol and watch what it does for your results. You could do it while you watch TV. You could do it while you read a book. I do it while I listen to an audiobook. So if you want to learn more about the Bon Charge products, including the sauna blanket, head over to boncharge.com/ketocamp. And if you use the coupon code KETOCAMP at checkout, you'll get 15% off your sauna blanket. And actually, any of their products are 15% off with that code. Bon Charge hooked you up. So head over to that domain or click the link down below and go get your Bon Charge products. All right, let's get back to today's video. Well said. Yeah, completely agree. That's the whole principle behind Keto Flex. It's right, intentionally flexing out, which Megan does. And it's important to do that. we have so many brilliant people in the keto space, low carb space, and it's okay if we don't agree, right? Sometimes that happens. But when I interview people like Dr. Benjamin Bickman. You're familiar with his work, Megan? Yeah.
Yeah.
Love him. Incredible human being. So smart. He believes in like long-term ketosis and not really flexing out. But I asked him the question, I'm like, do you ever flex out? Like, are there times where in your life you have ice cream or you have this with your kids? And he says, yeah, sometimes, at family events, I'll do that. So like to your point, most people are flexing out, whether it's intentionally or not. And there is a benefit to that. Men can get away with a little bit more strict, rigorous ketosis. Women have to go with their hormonal cycle, like you mentioned, but there is a time and place to do it. And carbs are not evil. We just want to work on the metabolism first. So there is some, due diligence in the beginning to work that metabolism up to a point where you actually could process those carbs like Megan is doing in a healthy way. So that's an important point because insulin is important for these hormonal conversions. It's important for building progesterone. I've also seen in men, Megan, those men who do keto for long term, whether it's like a year or longer, I see their sex hormone binding globulin go up, their testosterone drops a little bit,
Yeah.
and sometimes their TSH goes up, so their thyroid gets a little wonky. And so I'm not a big believer of anything that's too extreme.
I've kind of gone into nutrient genomics testing with people just to help them kind of evolve their diet. I truly think intermittency is the key for everything in life. Like women who are listening today, maybe more so than men, maybe men, women rarely use the same bottle of shampoo for like 3 months, let alone like three years. Yeah, you got to change it up, right?
I didn't know that. Women watching, let me know if that's true.
And our skincare regimens, right? Ladies, like when the seasons change, we have to adjust our skincare regimens. I moved from Toronto to California, totally different coast. I geek out over like natural skincare, but I geek out over like optimizing my skin. And I had to change things up because it affects it. And so it just kind of like we talk about sometimes the fasting method, rolling your diet with the season to create a bit more variability, being so important. So intermittency is in general very beneficial to us all. Actually, to Ben's point, we have this one gentleman, and I have his permission to share. I never share without asking for permission. And there's always these interesting cases, so I usually preemptively ask. But he was like so strict carnivore for about 5 years.
Wow.
And now we're showing symptoms of type 1 diabetes. Wow. Like pancreatic burnout, type 1 diabetes, late in onset, not necessarily so much autoimmune. And he's gone through the gamut of genetic testing and this and that because he's got these resources that are great. And just like you said, sex binding, globulin hormone up, testosterone, it's just kind of like a hot mess. And he was just like, no, carnivore is the way. Carnivore is the way. Zero carbs is the way. Zero insulin production is the way.
Use it or lose it.
And it's just, we tend to have always taken a bit more of a moderate intermittent approach with nutrition in addition to fasting. And now it's just trying to reintroduce that. And I hear so many people, they start keto, like really super strict keto or like a carnivore. I think it's great to cycle through this stuff. Absolutely. And then they just think it is all that they need to do. And I did this and I ended up, really affecting my thyroid, my adrenal function, my endometrial lining went super thin because the progesterone, everything was just a little bit out of balance. And I started to feel like garbage, 3 years down the road. So it's just being intermittent with it has been really helpful. And I see this with people all the time, especially women. But, if you start keto, that's great. One of the things I love about your program, is that you've got to introduce it down the path. Once that healing starts to happen, you've got to do that keto flex. And, sometimes people really struggle. So I'll recommend some nutrient genomic testing. I'm not saying that right. Nutrigenomics. I am like, I'm totally hormone space brain right now. But,
you're doing great.
That's for other reasons. But it just kind of helps, guide people to where, it's not as bad as it used to be. It used to be not so great, but the testing I think is kind of cool nowadays, and it helps show people that okay, maybe we need to change things, and there's a roadmap, here to help.
Yeah, it gives you some clues, which is great. Of course, epigenetics rules, but this kind of gives you clues on what you should lean to for the epigenetics. So great conversation. We have before we get into the fasting part of this conversation, For the VIP students that are watching right now, we sent you an email about 30 minutes before I went live. So if you want to come into the StreamYard studio and have the opportunity to come on here and ask Megan your question, what an opportunity. Now is the time to get into the studio. I see Bonnie and Deb back there. So in about 10 minutes, we'll go to the VIP. So just want to give you a heads up there. All right, fasting. We both love fasting. It's such an incredible tool. Nothing new about it. I would, you and Dr. Fung are like the pioneers for fasting. You were preaching it, you were teaching it, you were leading it before it got to where it is today. Now we live in a world where most people have heard about fasting. It's easier to post on social media without being attacked. So thank you for that, making it popular. But there's a lot of misconceptions. And we see, my question to you just right off the bat with fasting is like, we see a lot of studies that come out saying intermittent fasting does not work for weight loss. Intermittent fasting does some, whatever it is, negative to your thyroid. What are your thoughts on those studies? And how can those watching here understand that we don't want to fall for the headline? We want to see exactly how the study was conducted.
Yeah, absolutely. So you really got to look at the research. There was one recently, and it was just sort of time restricted eating. You were only eating one meal a day every day, but there were no restrictions on what you could have outside of that one meal. So it's kind of mind-boggling. So if you're chugging sodas and like energy drinks and like loading your coffee up with sugar all day long or drinking juice, like of course you're not going to get right results. So you really got to look at what their methodology is, what the parameters of the study is. All these randomized control trials comparing alternate daily fasting to calorie restriction, they follow these people for like 30, 40 weeks, and they do true fasting with them, 0 calories, water. And the calorie restriction groups reducing their calories by like 400 or 500 calories a day. Every single one of them shows incredible benefits, especially when it comes to weight loss, because that's the focus of most of these RCTs, to fasting. But all these little headline grabbing things are usually looking at forms of time-restricted eating. And there's huge benefits of time-restricted eating, but the controls are not very good. So there's a lot of garbage foods and other things. And if you take a population with insulin resistance too, like if you have insulin resistance, your insulin levels don't really even start to fall until around the 24-hour mark of a fast. So if you're doing like 16 or 18 hours or 14, 18 hours of daily fasting, it's just not enough. It's not therapeutic. It's great to keep someone in good health. And it's just sort of good practice. If we all did time restricted eating, we'd have such less rates of obesity, type 2 diabetes, metabolic issues, I believe. But that's starting from a relatively healthy population, or that's when you get to a relatively healthy place. If you've got a disease, you need a therapeutic approach. So hormonally, that insulin doesn't stop. We're doing a course right now, a January cohort, a lot of people are doing to help reset. And most of these people, they're like, oh, we're doing 14, 16, 18 hours or one meal a day or 24 hours a few times a week. And we really weren't losing anything. Or it was just kind of yo-yoing. And it's like, well, you're all insulin resistant. You're not even dropping it enough to start to see the healing benefits of fasting in the first place. So that often, goes totally ignored in the science. We're actually, my colleague, Dr. Nadia Pataguana, and I were actually talking about this at Low Carb Denver. And we'll see you there, Ben. Next month, just to help people. Time restricted eating is good and therapeutic fasting is good, and there's differences between the two. And this research on it, you've got to pay attention to what it's looking at. And we're going to talk about some of the more controversial studies that have come up that have really kind of made people question fasting, but the controls just weren't there, and the assessment of the population being tested was not there either.
Oh, yeah. I can't wait to see you and Nadia. I love Nadia too. And it's funny, Megan, because I consider you a great friend of mine and also somebody that a mentor as well. I've never met you in person. We've never met each other in person. This is going to be the first time next month in Denver. If for those watching, if you live in Denver, Low Carb Denver is the conference. I think it's the third week of February. I'll be there. Megan's going to be there. Nadia, it's going to be a great weekend. So we'll give you a link for that. Alina, we have a coupon code. I could find it, but we can take care of that later. So hope to see some of you there. I love that you recommended. So here's a teaching note for all you watching. Put this in your notes in your homework assignment here. If you're insulin resistant, it's going to require longer fasting, right? More than 24 hours to really drop those insulin levels. You would build up to that. If you're brand new to fasting, you wouldn't just go out and do a 32-hour fast or a 40-hour fast. You'd build the muscle, but keep that in mind. You got to be a little bit more aggressive to drop those insulin levels beyond 24 hours. The billion-dollar question, though, because I don't think we have a concrete answer to this, is at what point during a fast does autophagy start to get ramped up? Right. And I know that some researchers have measured this in clinics looking at the LC3A protein, which is showing you autophagy is occurring, but we can't do that at home. So what is your best estimate? If somebody's, I know it's different for somebody who's insulin resistant versus somebody who's metabolically healthy. So where do you think it's starting to happen with somebody who's insulin resistant and then somebody who's metabolically healthy?
Yeah, absolutely. So like likewise, we couldn't measure it, but we've got 20-ish, 30,000 people now that we've had these observations. And people who end up doing like the 36-hour fast 3 times a week or a little bit more. 36 hours is when you eat 3 meals on your eating day. 42 is like if you eat 2. 48 is if you eat 1. But like when you're doing that, like say Sunday night to Tuesday night, so you're getting in that full day fast. So in our baseline clinic patients, our initial pilot group, they had the option of doing 324s or 336s. We're talking 100 years ago now, but that was all our clinic would allow us to do with patients at the time. Those who did the 336-hour fast a week, they didn't have loose skin. Those who did the 24-hour fast, which sometimes ended up being more like 20 to 24-hour fast, those are the ones where they would have the loose skin. Huh. So we use this as a marker. And then we noticed more. We started reporting these observations from our patients. Those in the 36-hour group, skin tags are going away. Scars were improving. These other observational signs that autophagy is actually occurring in these patients, that was not happening in the 24-hour or less group. People who really stuck to that, sort of 1 meal a day, 3 times a week protocol, they are the ones that ended up needing sort of skin removal surgery if they reached a certain amount of weight loss over time. The other ones didn't. The most astounding patient, he was one of our very first patients. He was 5'6", came in a wheelchair that day, fasting for diabetes. He was in rough shape from a car accident several years ago, needed to lose weight, needed to get off the insulin so he could lose weight to help, so he could hopefully improve his mobility. Older guy. Anyways, he ended up losing 165 pounds. This man religiously fasted 3 times a week for 36 hours. Wow. He was just a robotic saint, with it, and did his great TRE. Like the compliance was like unreal. And so, he's older. At a point he was walking with a cane, which was super cool after some of the weight loss. But he said to us one day, he said, "Dr. Fung, Megan, like, why don't I have loose skin?" He's like, "I'm old, I'm immobile, I'm in rough shape. It doesn't make sense." He's like, I've heard the stories. I know Megan's lost 80 pounds, but Megan, like at the time I was like 28, right? So you think everything's possible for 20-year-olds. So, I get why she did it. She's in her 20s, and why she doesn't have loose skin. And she must be a maniac at the gym, and that must melt away skin. Like that was his thought, like it is for so many people. And Jason and I just looked at each other and we're like, it's like, so that's just what we found. So when someone, who's been doing more 24s, who's a little bit more concerned about the loose skin, we push it to the longer fast. And then when we're working with people who that is a goal for them to happen, and we know that they have insulin resistance, we do sort of start with a minimum of the 36-hour protocol. So if they're trying to achieve autophagy concurrently with tackling insulin related issues. And it's amazing. Like every now and then a woman will show up on the other side of the screen and start to pull down her pants. And I'm a little bit caught off guard, but they want to show me that, hey, I had kids 30 years ago and my C-section scar is gone. Wow. So that's what we tend to drive people with. I know Jason really doesn't believe that from his looking at everything that in the insulin resistant population, it doesn't even start, till after that 24-hour mark. So
Wow.
whenever we get these individuals in, we try to do it. And clinically, what he's saying, we do see it observationally.
That's so interesting. Okay, that's for somebody who's metabolically challenged a little bit. What about somebody like me? When do you think?
Yeah.
When do you estimate I'm getting
So
autophagy during this?
we typically tell people, 7, 8 hours after a meal, between 8 and 14 hours is what I tell people.
Okay, 8
Yeah,
and
these
14.
are just based on conversations with Jason and sort of our gathering of the literature and what we also experience. But I don't really know. And I
Yeah,
usually
we
tell
don't know.
people we don't really know. We just know that you're, within that 24 hours, if you're doing that. Like if someone's in maintenance and they want to do a 24-hour fast once a week, you're probably getting a good amount of autophagy. And if you're eating a good diet, you're exercising, you're being mindful of TRE, there's probably some low grade benefits all of the time.
Yeah, and if you do exercise in the fasted state, you might even get there faster too.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, let's get to VIP Q&A. And this is not medical advice, just to reiterate that. When I fast over 48 hours, says tomorrow, I stop sleeping. I'm wondering if that is too much stress until I get better fat adapted. Do I need to do keto first? I just started fasting.
Yeah, so a bunch of great questions, not necessarily sort of super duper straight answers. So there's many hormone changes that happen to women, and hormones that get unbalanced, sex hormones as a result of insulin resistance, that can affect sleep. But if you're someone who noticed a definite correlation between fasting and sleep disturbances, it could be a temporary effects of some other hormonal changes that are happening. And I know Jason always likes to blame it on the noradrenaline. So one of those counter-regulatory hormones that helps us lose weight. So we like it. It helps us burn that body fat. It helps maintain our resting metabolic rate, but it also leaves us feeling, a little energized. Sometimes people feel a little anxious or a little shaky when they're fasting. So, I mean, there's different things that you can do in a very general level. Magnesium, a well-absorbed magnesium like lysine, for example, can help counteract some of that. In some cases, we'll use like L-theanine and GABA to help counteract that too if it's really bad. Usually, if it's sort of fasting induced and noradrenaline related, if you stay consistent with those 48s over a period of 2 or 3 weeks, the sleeping actually gets better. So that's something that we encourage people to do. So you can always scale back your fast and build your fasting muscle up slowly. A good transitional strategy that we talk a lot about is sort of the 30-16, where people are eating once a day for 6 days of the week, but they're alternating the meals. So say lunch and dinner. So lunch Monday, Tuesday dinner, and that's a 30-ish hour fast. So it's super annoying. No one likes following it long term, but it's not meant to be. But sometimes it can just help. We'll use it in gout cases, acid reflux cases, when people have really bad GERD before they start fasting.
Interesting.
So it just sort of helps the body acclimate a little bit more slowly to the fast, while still getting in some longer periods of fasting here or there. So you could try that. Do you need to do ketogenic first? Definitely, I think helps if you can do a ketogenic diet first. And most of the patients Jason and I saw in clinic didn't. Not everyone in our business, the fasting method does it either. And they fast and they do just fine. But I think that keto and fasting are a really great combo when you're trying to combat that insulin resistance head on at the start.
Yeah, great answer. I agree 100%. Okay, next question from Bonnie. Do you ever recommend us doing a glucose tolerance test?
It's interesting. I know. So the stuff that they make you drink is like this orange syrup garbage from heck that
It's
like
all about glucola, right?
none of you would ever want to drink it. Like even a lot of people I'm immersed with right now are doing the pregnancy thing. And they're like, we do not want to put that in our body with a baby in it. Like, are you kidding me? So how do I talk my doctors out of this? And I do think the test is interesting, but there's other ways that you can do it. Sometimes I'll encourage, like when we were working with patients in the clinic, or encourage people, it's like, no, you know what, I'm going to eat some starch. first, and I won't eat anything else. And I'll be, my 12, 14 hours fasted, and I'll have some starch, and then I'll do the oral glucose tolerance test. I know a few women recently were pregnant that came to that consensus with the doctor when the doctor would accept CGM results too. I think the test results are cool and very telling. It's just the mechanism and means to get there, I think, are kind of crummy.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, it's not ideal. Two more questions from Bonnie. Thoughts on using a Trantil? I don't know if you're familiar with that supplement for SIBO. And then what's your favorite sweetener for recipes? Which ones are good versus evil?
Yeah, so I don't know if you remember, Ben, but when I was living in this mold-filled house and having all of these issues, I actually reached out to you to help troubleshoot. And at the time, you had recommended this to me. I'm pretty sure it was
Yeah, it
you.
was. Yeah, you're right.
And it was super helpful. I mean, of course, removing myself from that environment was like the most helpful thing,
Yes.
but it definitely helped. I mean, when you've got a house in a city like Toronto, it's not super easy just to pick up and move. It's like living in San Francisco or New York City. So it's financially stressful. So it was really, really helpful. And since I've learned about it from you, I've recommended it to so many people to help them with SIBO, or I've learned from our community since we started talking about it, that a lot of people have been using it now for quite some time and have noticed some really great benefits. In terms of if you need a sweetener for a recipe, which one is the least of the evils? I don't know where Ben sits on this. So I've been, I'm more of a fan of natural things and things that are more minimally processed. So even with my diabetic community, I'll typically recommend like honey and pure maple syrup. So like Manuka honey, for example, or pure maple syrup if they need it for something. Or I know like sometimes people like to have like protein pancakes here and there, and put a drop or two of pure maple syrup in a cup of butter and, use that to pour over those protein pancakes. So I'm more of a fan of those. I'm not really opposed to monk fruit too, if people need it periodically. I've just seen so much gastrointestinal distress that really drives people off track when using sugar alcohols and things like stevia. And it's just like kind of a poor nightmare because they end up going into the sinkhole with it, with the stress, and then eating helps, but not eating, like the cravings are for the wrong things. And it just ends up being kind of a bit of a nightmare. And I don't notice that as much with monk fruit. And yeah, again, I don't actually find that there's too much of an insulin response with pure maple syrup either. So maybe that's just my Canadian supporting that. But
your Canadian bias there. That's good. And if you're using like honey or maple syrup, you're not overdoing it. You're just giving it enough to give you that sweetness, that mild sweetness.
Yeah.
Next question is, can you clarify on the 36-hour fast for GERD?
Yeah. So if you have GERD, fasting can sometimes make it worse before it makes it better, but it does get better. So it can absolutely help with GERD. So when someone presents themselves to me with GERD, we just go low and slow with the fasting scale. If someone shows up without GERD and they want to jump into doing the first fast ever being 48, we usually kind of test the waters and see how the first one maybe goes and talk about pivot plans if it's not going so well, 18 hours into it, what they can do. But with GERD, we don't tend to do that. It can act up. It's one of those sort of rare times too, where people want to come off as much medication as possible. I was actually talking to someone in our community about this. Maybe for a few weeks, you still want to lean into it and then start to test the waters without it. Of course, seek your doctor's guidance on this. We found it can just make a bit of an easier transition to fasting. Then you can fast without pain, without it increasing your GERD. You're feeling better. You're eating now without experiencing it. You never need those medications again, and you can focus on your healing. And then that's the optimal goal. Usually takes about 4 to 6 weeks. So go low and slow with the fasting. Some natural things, people sometimes say they help. Sometimes they say they don't, like the raw unfiltered apple cider vinegar and lemon juice. We'll typically shy a little bit more away from broth and focus on like salty water or different forms of sodium during this time, fasting because you find that broth can sometimes sort of exacerbate it too. So, we're really just by that 6-week mark, our goal is for the person to be able to fast and eat with ease for however long that they want to fast for too, and have things like broth if they want to have it as well.
Fantastic tips. Okay, a couple more questions, one here and then one on the community tab. So the final question here is from Bonnie. Megan, actually that's the previous one from Bonnie. Do you recommend any pancreatic digestive enzymes for keto dieting for those with a faulty gallbladder?
Sometimes people do find benefits from ox bile. Sometimes people will take like beta-catenin HCl and pepsin. I definitely think there's a time and a place for those situations. If people lost their gallbladders, like 20 years ago and they're digesting things just fine, I don't think there's a need to go out and add in a bunch of stuff. But if you're struggling or it's a more present or recent health issues, sometimes I do find that they give people benefits.
Me too. Yeah, me too. Okay, a couple more here because I know Megan's got to go soon. Michelle Stone, I can easily accomplish 12 to 14 hours of fasting overnight, etc. Shall I increase that gradually or just jump up to a 24-hour fast as a starting point?
Yeah, so when you have GERD or reflux, it's good to take a slow and gradual approach with fasting. But most people, can sort of jump into those therapeutic fasting protocols just fine. When you're new to fasting and you've got a lot of insulin resistance, you're going to see that insulin fall really dramatically at the start, and you're going to be at risk for more water loss. So just be diligent about the electrolytes. I know a lot of people want to do water fasting in the world and take water and salt, but if you're at that sort of, intense insulin resistance phase of your healing and you're going to jump into doing some of the longer therapeutic fasts, you are going to be losing electrolytes. It's going to be hard to sort of supplement with salty water. There's so much you can take. So it might be worthwhile showing yourself some grace for a couple of weeks and leaning into things like broth and sugar-free pickle juice. People seem to really not want to use fasting aids, but there's a time and a place for them. And I think that's one of the times of the place. So usually with people I work with, if that's their goal is to jump into something very therapeutic off the bat, then I'll, really encourage them for 2 weeks, meet me halfway here, have, at least 1 cup of broth or something a day. So we're able to maintain this. I don't want you to like, quote unquote, strain your fasting muscle.
Great. And Michelle, you're in the academy, so we could coach you on that. Jay says, does Megan believe in black coffee, tea, or plain carbonated water like San Pellegrino will it elevate insulin? What does Dr. Fung tell his patients about consuming this during their fasting window?
Yeah, so Dr. Fung is a huge fan of tea. Years ago, he wanted us to make tea. I think when it comes to tea and coffee, you have to sort of be mindful about your body's own sort of cortisol response to that caffeine. Sometimes people drink coffee, feel great, suppresses their appetite for other hours. Caffeine doesn't always serve everybody in that fashion. I am definitely one of those people. So I have had a more difficult divorce from caffeine than I did from my first husband. It's intense, but it's just not, not good for me or my system. So I think, it's about 50-50 in my clinical observations. Sometimes people find it to be a great fasting aid. Sometimes they don't. We are more fans of herbal teas, but not doing anything to excess. Mint tea is a phenomenal appetite suppressant, peppermint, spearmint, whatever mint you want to have. Ginger tea can really help settle this tummy too. Dandelion tea is great support for the liver. Nettle leaf tea for glucose. So I have a whole cupboard of herbal teas that I now lean into rather than the caffeinated ones so much. And then, I try to use a rule of 3. You keep it to 3 a day. Don't, guzzle 900 cups of dandelion root tea a day. They do have therapeutic properties. So be mindful of them. And carbonated water, Jason loves as a appetite suppressant. I think it's a phenomenal one too, especially if you got those tummy gurgles. It can really shut the tummy up.
Yeah, wonderful. Last question, and then I know you got to go. Jay says, hi, Megan. Can you share with us both yours and Dr. Funk's eating protocols? Are you both carnivore? If not, I can ask the amount of carbs. What type do you consume, and how often do you and Dr. Fung fast, and for how long? I know that's a lot there.
Yeah, no, so Jason and I do totally different things when it comes to nutrition. So Jason fasts once a year for about 5 to 7 days, as sort of maintenance,
Just
seasonal
water.
clinging, just water in his tea. And then his days vary, 2 meals or 1 meal, just depending on how hectic he is at the hospital and if he has time to eat. On the weekends, he does typically eat breakfast, and he's only got one kid at home now, but he says he likes to mix it up. But he says typically only eats 2 meals still on the weekend. He just likes to mix up the meal timing a bit. Jason eats he eats a diet that's geared towards more real whole foods, but he's definitely not one to shy away from ice cream if he wants it.
Me too.
Yeah. I struggled a little bit more with my health, and I'm going through all of this baby stuff. So I've been a little bit more intense. I did 242s and a 24 to reverse my disease. Since then, I follow more of a protocol like Jason's, where I do either 2 meal or 1 meal. I've let my work life kind of dictate how that happens. My wedding was kind of disastrous. I got married earlier on in my journey, and I got married at Disney. So at one of the resorts at Disney. So it was super stressful, and I ended up caving into all those Disney things. So even though I had done a lot of great help, for a month, I did some therapeutic fasting afterwards. So anyways, 2 meals and 1 meal is sort of the standard. 4 times a year, though, I do an extended fast. I travel a lot more than Jason, and I tend to eat out a lot more than Jason. Right now, I've been in like this baby making thing for a while. So I've been doing 14 to 16 hours of fasting a day, depending on where I am in the hormonal universe. So it's been very different. I tend to, be a little bit more particular with my diet, although I do have a weakness for really good Napolitano pizza. And so I'll probably have 2 or 3 pizzas a year. I tend to carb cycle more with root vegetables, or when I have starches on a regular basis, like right now, trying to get my progesterone to be super peppy. I'm having more root vegetables in my diet, in my routine, but I'm more, I guess, paleo minded.
Peppy progesterone. Do you have time for one more cancer question, or do you have to go? Okay.
No, I got time.
Okay. Debbie says, can someone be in stage 4 cancer and they have months to live and have success using fasting? Is there a point where it's too late?
Is a really, really sort of tough question to answer. We have worked with a lot of cancer patients. Jason wrote the cancer code. It is never the sole tool or sole mechanism for helping someone overcome cancer, but it is a tool that is intended to be used with other tools. And we've had people that have had pretty grim prognoses and are doing really well. I had this young guy I work with was given 6 months right after his wedding. He's now been cancer-free for 5 years. His wife's actually pregnant, and they didn't have to use the sperm that he begged before chemo and radiation because his testosterone's good. So there are these miracle-ish kind of stories that do happen. But I'll tell you, with that gentleman, fasting was just one of the many tools that he was using for that time. So I genuinely don't think being mindful about meal timing and food quality is harmful for anybody. So that's just something I would, keep in mind, and make sure you're working with your healthcare team to see if it's a good fit for you.
Yeah, that's amazing. Megan, where's the best place for everybody to go check you out?
Yeah, so you can head over to thefastingmethod.com, or I'm, for the first time in my entire life, going to do my own social media. So I'm going to start doing that in February, and you can find me at Megan at J Ramos, MEGAN J Ramos. So I just been infinitely frustrated and want to get my own voice out there a little less manipulated.
Absolutely. I love that you're doing that. You also have your podcast, Fasting
Oh
Method
yeah, we've
podcast.
got a fasting method podcast, which is cool. There's 3 of us that host it, and we really try to keep it on fasting and behavior strategies as well.
Yeah, we'll drop links for all of Megan's work in the. We'll send you an email with that, but we'll also put it in the live stream chat. Megan, thank you so much for coming on here on a Saturday. I'm so grateful for you. You're just incredible. I can't wait to finally give you a big hug in Denver next month. And just thank you so much for today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks everyone for listening. Happy fasting. And Ben, I look forward to seeing you soon.
See you, Megan. Have a great day. Have a great weekend.
Bye.